My name is Tracy Mishkin. I am an MFA student in creative writing at Butler University and a member of the Interurban Writing Group. I am also a customer service representative in a health insurance call center who has a PhD in English. 14 years ago, I left a tenured position at a university in Central Georgia to return to my hometown, Indianapolis, to ensure that my son Noah could receive an education that would accommodate his differences and celebrate his talents.
Noah graduated from Heron High School in May 2015, and he will be a freshman at Ball State University in the fall.
My chapbook, I Almost Didn't Make It to McDonald's, was published by Finishing Line Press in 2014. 3 of my poems have been published in anthologies. 2 in Reckless Writing 2013, the continued modernization of poetry, and 1 in Best of Flying Island 2014. I have poems forthcoming in The Quotable and Little Patuxent Review, and my work appears in several online publications. Before I began sending my work out regularly, I shared my poetry with family and friends by making desktop published booklets, 9 of them, starting in college in the late 1980s and continuing until 2013. Today I'd like to share a poem called Metastasis and talk about how I revised the initial draft from the fall of 2014 into the soon-to-be published poem it is today. Metastasis is a medical term that describes cancer spreading to other parts of the body, which is what happened to my friend Pat in the summer of 2014 when she was 71 years old. Before I discuss this poem as a poem, I'd like to tell you that Pat is currently doing extremely well. She's in a clinical trial of a medication that is doing a great job of fighting her cancer. This poem was written before she started this treatment when she had been told she had only months to live. Pat is a tough cookie who is very fortunate to be able to test drive this particular new medication. Metastasis. Some things I can negotiate, not my best friend's driveway. My tires flatten her grass each Sunday. When I am early, she appears in a white bathrobe, hairless as an egg. Turning to retrieve her iridescent cap, she does not hear me say that she is beautiful. In these days before brain lesions begin to hurt, we can sing camp songs, drink 6 cups of tea. Often we sit outside so long the moon appears, hanging like a tumor on the sky. We are patio furniture, motionless in twilight. I could grab a bag of dirt, fill an old boot on her deck, spit sunflower seeds over the laces to plant them. In my country, we do not walk away and leave our sisters in lowered coffins for the backhoe's scoop and dump. For her, I will shovel the earth myself. A group of high school students from the International Baccalaureate Magnet School of the Indianapolis Public School System came to Butler University in September 2014, and I volunteered to read some of my poems, talk about writing, and do a writing prompt with the students. I really enjoyed meeting with them. I did the writing prompt while they did, and I wrote something about my mother and her garden. When we shared our work with each other afterwards, we somehow got on to the subject of tea versus coffee. These 2 nuggets, gardening and discussions of caffeinated beverages, were the beginning of Metastasis. Not Pat, and not cancer. Gardening is not a very big part of the finished poem, and the tea and coffee debating was revised out completely, but the poem would not have existed without them as the sparks. It is an interesting fact about poetry that the triggering ideas or words often do not end up in the final version. Why? Because part of the writing process involves letting go intellectually, allowing the poem to do its own thing, and seeing where it goes. Revision is a difficult process that was not easy for me to learn. I spent many years coasting on my ability to write a snappy first draft of a poem or paper in a short amount of time. I learned the hard way in graduate school that my first effort is not enough. Revising poems is even harder than revising essays because I am in love with every word in my poems, and I am not good at letting go intellectually. But the more I practice revising, the easier it becomes to figure out what needs work and how to make the necessary changes. This poem went through many drafts and was workshopped by my Butler MFA class and by my writing group, Interurban. In March 2015, I submitted it to a journal called The Quotable, and it was accepted. Metastasis will be published in issue 17 in the summer of 2015. I sent an email to the high school student's teacher to let them know. I think they will be excited to hear that they sparked a poem that will be published and to see that hard work can pay off. This is the first draft of Metastasis. It's called When Do Brain Lesions Begin to Hurt? Today we'll cleave the usual from the strange. We debate the relative merits of tea and coffee while Rome burns. The moon hangs like a tumor on the gut of the sky, an old boot left outside. Imagine I grab a bag of dirt, fill it to the top, spit sunflower seeds across your patio. My tires flatten your grass each Sunday. I will not leave you in your coffined grave for the backhoe. I will shovel the dirt myself. When I put the first draft and the final version side by side, you can see that the first 3.5 lines of the first draft were completely cut, but much of the last 7.5 lines remain in some form. The first draft has a first-person speaker who refers to her friend as you. I kept the first-person speaker, but in the final version, the speaker refers to her friend as she, the third person, rather than you, the second person. More importantly, when I look back at the first draft, it seems like a collection of thoughts and images that are not linked together very much. In other words, it's a first draft. I had to develop a coherent narrative that made sense to readers. Part of the revision process was just moving things around. So, for example, the reference to running over Pat's lawn moved up earlier in the poem. I used the idea of negotiating a driveway, as opposed to negotiating the unfamiliar waters of a friend's terminal illness, to hook the reader. The enjambment at the end of the first line is also an important part of this move. I want people to think the speaker will say she cannot negotiate having a friend with cancer. Instead, expectations are shaken up when the speaker talks about having trouble with her friend's driveway. But we are reminded immediately when the friend opens her door that she is being treated for cancer because she is bald. However, I had to do much more than just move things around. When I showed this poem to my writing group, the part about the boot, the dirt, and the sunflower seed spitting confused them. I tried to make it clearer, but my MFA class at Butler was also confused by that part in the later draft. Many of the details in the poem are taken from my real-life visits to Pat's house, but the old boot comes from my house where my husband leaves all kinds of stuff on our deck. So the part of the poem where the speaker talks about spitting sunflower seeds into a boot filled with dirt is completely fictional. It's also kind of weird, so I have to be sure people can understand it. Let me add that I am a good driver and I don't really run over Pat's grass regularly, and we have never sat outside for hours singing camp songs. Multiple cups of tea, a white bathrobe, yes, those are real, but not everything. Don't be afraid to invent things or exaggerate real life as you write. It just needs to hang together and make sense, assuming that you are writing a poem that makes sense. Some of my first readers also thought Metastasis was a revenge poem instead of a friendship poem because the ending made them think of someone saying in anger, "I will bury you." This was way off what I was thinking with the poem. My first reaction was, what is wrong with you people? However, they were right that I did not show the friendship between the two characters clearly enough for readers to grasp the nature of their relationship in the first draft. I had to meet the challenge of describing Pat and adding more emotion and depth to the depiction of the friendship. Just because I feel it behind my writing doesn't mean that my readers can feel it. I have to show them. We often hear show don't tell as writing advice. And in the first draft, I wasn't telling or showing. I also thought about my audience when I worked on the part about shoveling the dirt myself. I added this to the first draft. In my country, we do not walk away and leave our sisters. I am Jewish. Mourners personally shoveling dirt onto the coffin is one of our customs that shows respect for the dead. I wanted it to make sense to the reader without having to explain all that background information, so I let "in my country" be a shorthand version that would suggest to the reader that the speaker is a little different culturally and that difference impacts her feelings about her friend's mortality. When Metastasis was accepted for publication, I finally got up the nerve to show it to Pat. She liked it, but she told me that she plans to be cremated and have a family-only funeral, so I won't be shoveling any grave dirt for her in real life. She always makes me laugh. Right now, Pat is too busy gardening to be thinking about death much, so I'll take my cue from her and cultivate my poems. While I confused a lot of people at first, some parts of Metastasis were loved by readers from the start. The moon hanging like a tumor was a real fan favorite, although I ended up removing on the gut because I decided it was overkill. Other parts that I liked were recommended for the chopping block by readers. Originally, the backhoe scoop and dump was the backhoe's indifferent scoop and dump. My Butler professor thought the word indifferent wasn't necessary. I liked it, and it took me a while to understand his point, but now I agree. Revision involves both adding and subtracting. The original title of the poem became a line in the second stanza, and I chose Metastasis for the title. However, this is not an easy word for me to pronounce, and when I first read the poem in public, I got stuck on it and couldn't get myself to say it. Metastasis. Watch out for titles that are hard to say, and read everything you write out loud to see how it sounds. That's also an important part of revision, even if you don't plan to read it in public. I suggest using the Save As function on your word processing program when you revise so that you can have different versions of the same poem typed up. This technique allows me to feel that I can always change it back and that the changes I am making are not necessarily permanent. I think that I can make better changes if I'm not stuck on worrying if they are good ones. Here are 2 exercises you can try with one of your poems. Circle all the verbs in your poem. Underline the adjectives. Now study these words and see which ones are too blah and ordinary, which ones are not contributing enough to the poem. Can you think of something better? You can do this exercise with nouns and adverbs as well, of course. Take the word run. Could you replace it with sprint? Could you replace the word small with tiny? A related revision technique is to look for combinations of verbs and adverbs or adjectives and nouns that can be replaced with one more interesting word. If you have said big man, would it be even better to say giant? And if you say walk slowly, might you consider saying amble instead? Sometimes you can improve your language by changing a phrase into a single word. Instead of saying make up your mind, just say decide. Instead of saying run toward, charge will give a more vivid and concise image to the reader. My second revision exercise draws on a completely different part of the brain. Rewrite your poem from the bottom up. The last line is now the first line, the second to last line is the second line, etc. Read your upside-down poem out loud. Listen to the strange ways that words and ideas are connecting with each other. Does it give you any ideas? I was very resistant to this exercise when I first tried it in the summer of 2012. I felt like my pretty good poem was being completely changed and ruined by this exercise. I didn't understand that the point of writing it upside down was to give me ideas, not that this weird thing was actually going to be the next draft of my poem. Thank you for listening to this discussion of revision in my poem Metastasis. I enjoyed making this, my first movie, and I enjoyed talking about poetry with you today. Thanks.